Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Confino. I'm an executive editor of The Guardian, and also I chair a website we run called Guardian Sustainable Business, which is there to support the transformation of business to a more sustainable future. And I've got Coen Gilbert, one of the three co-founders of B Labs, which is a whole new way of doing business and coming back to business as a values proposition rather than just as a profits proposition. The way we're going to run this, and it's great to have the audience in the room and also the audience online, is we're going to have a conversation. We haven't prepared anything. We want your engagement, so we're not going to wait till the end if you want to ask questions. If you're desperate to ask a question during the session, if you want to come down to the front or put your hand up, then we'll get you engaged straight away. If you think I'm doing a really bad job, you can come and take my seat, and if you want to challenge Jay on something, if you think he's doing a bad job, well, that's tough on you guys because you're not replacing him. So I'm going to get underway straight away with Jay. Firstly, just introduce yourself.
Sure. Jay Coen Gilbert, and as you said, Joe, one of the three co-founders of a nonprofit called B Lab that is sort of the organization trying to serve the BCorp community globally.
Okay, so before we get into what B Corps are and everything, can you just say, where did you come from all this? So what's the problem we're trying to solve before we get into the solution?
Yeah, sure. So I think as we look at it, the problem is that business needs to be part of the solution to create a more shared and durable prosperity, but that a very influential, although some might argue shrinking group of people don't know that business is supposed to be part of the solution. And then a large and growing community of people believe that business can be part of the solution, or actively moving business in that direction, but are constrained in doing so by a host of different factors.
Okay, before we get into sort of, the future, let's just look at in terms of the status quo. So yeah. Why isn't business being the solution now? What is business levels of trust all-time low,
right.
Crises all-time low, sort of companies getting into trouble all-time high. What's going on?
It's less about like what business is doing poorly. We're not coming at it through the perspective of shame on you, business, for not doing better. It's more from the perspective of we are challenged collectively with large, growing, and sometimes seemingly intractable problems, whether you think of them as growing inequality, or various different environmental problems. And that increasingly government and the nonprofit or NGO sectors are necessary but insufficient to the task of solving those problems. And so that leaves us with people and business as the only actors that have the capacity and the scale to respond to those challenges in a way that can be effective. And so it's not so much that business is doing bad, that there are other people who might make that argument. That's not sort of the energy that we're bringing to the party. The energy that we're bringing is, if you care about those problems, business needs to be part of the solution because the other institutions are no longer capable of keeping up. Okay,
so if business is part of the solution, give us give us your 2 minutes on your journey. So yeah. Let's not blame business. Business can be a force for good. Let's aim to do that.
Right.
Where were you sitting? What were you doing at that time? And give us 2 minutes on your journey.
Sure. So each of the three co-founders of B Lab are business people by background. We're not academics or think tank folks or activists. We're business people. And so two of us started and then built a basketball footwear and apparel company called And1, sort of consumer products company. Fighting the good fight against one of the biggest companies on the planet and most effective product marketing companies on the planet, Nike. We did that for 13 years and had some great success. And our third partner was a private equity investor on Wall Street for 18 years. And so we come from business as operators, entrepreneurs, and investors. And as we were sort of ending that first phase of our career and coming into the next, we each sort of took a different path but got to the same place where we were looking out into the future of what's next, and we had that same thought, which is that there's a lot of stuff out there that we'd like to, a lot of problems we'd like to address, but that running for office or starting a nonprofit didn't seem like the most effective way to get at it, And so we said, how do we help business become part of the solution, or at least help those business people that are already seeing themselves in that role? How do we help them do a better job and more people follow in their footsteps? And so we left our various things and decided to throw in our lot together to start B-Lab, whose purpose is to serve that growing movement of people that are using business as a force for good.
Okay, so how are you serving them? What's the mechanics?
Yeah, so fair question. So the mechanics are sort of threefold. At the core of our worldview is a sort of entrepreneurs are the engine of change. And so the things that we do are all centered around the entrepreneur. So the first thing that we do is shine a light on those entrepreneurs that are really changing the norms, right? That are redefining what it means to be successful in business. And they're not just doing it because they raise their hand and say, look at me, I'm green, or look at me, I'm responsible or sustainable. They're actually meeting objective, third-party verified standards for social environmental performance, for legal accountability, and for transparency, which then puts the power in the hands of the rest of us as people to look for those companies that are sort of worthy of our support. And so those companies that we shine a light on are called B Corps, and the B stands for better, like a better way to do business, better for their workers, better for the community, better for the environment. And now there are about 840 of those certified B corporations across 60, 70, 80 different industries in almost 30 countries around the world. And so they're sort of the leaders of this broader movement to redefine success. So that's one thing that B-Lab does. The other thing that we do is we give all businesses the tools to either start the journey towards practicing a more mindful business to create more positive impact for their workers, the community environment, which is this tool called the B Impact Assessment, which is now being used by a little over 15,000 businesses around the world. And it's sort of a roadmap. And says if you want to think about this stuff, here's a framework for you to think about it. And whether you're taking your first step or your 101st step, here's a way for you to think about how to use your business as a force for good. Another piece of the work that we do is now that we have this community of businesses, either certified or using these tools, they become a pretty powerful political constituency in the US. I can't speak for anywhere else in the world, but in the US, business has a pretty powerful voice. And so it's one thing if individual citizens or NGOs sort of talk about how they like the world to be. It's very different if business leaders say, this is what I need to do business. And so these business leaders have banded together, and they've actually passed laws in 20 states to create a distinct new type of corporation in the US that is sort of hardwired to create a positive impact on the world and is legally accountable to doing that, which basically turns existing US corporate law on its head and reverses profit as, instead of it being the end that we seek, it just becomes the means to fuel a higher end or a higher purpose, which is to create a positive impact.
Okay, I'm really interested in digging a bit deeper into that political process, because business keeps on saying, oh, well, look, we can't act because we've got no regulatory framework, and that's just the way it is, and we can't do much. How did you go about, because you recently got the law passed in Delaware, which is the headquarters of whatever, 70, 80% of US businesses. How did you go about that process of driving political change? Because everyone hears about the negative aspects of lobbying and the fossil fuel lobby, et cetera. So how did you turn that around?
Yeah, so we don't lobby, because we can't, but we educate. And at the end of the day, it wasn't B-Lab that got the laws changed. It was the community of B corporations. It was the businesses. Because the truth is the legislators and the bar associations with whom we worked to get these laws changed didn't care too much about what some crazy NGO thought about corporate law, and understandably so. What they did care a lot about is what CEOs and investors thought about corporate law, whether it was helping them or hindering them from running a business in the way that they thought gave them the most sustainable competitive advantage to create the most long-term value, not only for their shareholders, but for society. And so the process for us was first talking to all those entrepreneurs and investors to find out if the legal system served them, and if not, what changes needed to be made. We learned about things like shareholder primacy and fiduciary duty and all kinds of things that we knew nothing about when we started. And then we worked with a bunch of corporate attorneys who tended to work with these kinds of companies, either representing the early stage venture funds that were investing them, or in those sort of pioneering entrepreneurs who were feeling both fearful about bringing on outside capital, and for fear that that capital would then create pressure to move away from mission over time. And we had them sort of start with a blank piece of paper and said, if we were designing a corporate structure, to specifically meet the needs of this new kind of investor and this new kind of entrepreneur. What would it look like? And so we did that. We created a model piece of legislation. And then it was the business leaders in each of those states who said, I've got the relationships with the bar associations. I've got the relationships with the legislators. Let me take this to them. And your job, B-Lab, is to sort of get my back and make sure that there's a whole slew of businesses that are sort of walking with us. And so what happened is first in Maryland, then in Vermont, in California, New York, and then 15 other states, and like you said, ending in Delaware this past summer, is each of those bar associations and then each of those legislators said, we get it. These businesses are not well served by current law. We need to create a distinct entity that they can choose to use. They can choose not to, and none of this is regulatory and forcing anybody to do something. And so our general philosophy is if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. And these CEOs and these investors believe this is quite simply just a better way to do business. Not only better for their bottom line, for their investors, but also better for their workers, the community, and the environment. And as a result, they're going to choose to practice business this way.
Okay. The cynical part of me says, you look at the world of sustainability.
That's a big part, Joe.
That's 99%. There's one bit I hold just for special occasions. But I mean, there's part of me that says, there's so many initiatives, so many, so many projects. Very few of them ever reach scale. So while it's great that there's lots of grassroots thing happening, none of them ever spike up and say, actually, this has become mainstream.
Yeah.
So I mean,
right.
Are you just another little initiative that's really great, that will, build up a bit, but then will plateau in the next couple of years and no change?
Yeah, we'll see. The short answer is we don't know. Maybe we will be a little cute, niche, marginal initiative. Or maybe this will be the tip of the spear, or the community of businesses that sort of plants the flag high enough up the mountain that people can see it and gives them a clear path to follow. The thing that I find inspiring about the BCorp community is, in addition to sort of 800 and some odd inspiring individual stories about sustainable ag and impact investing and all the rest, what's powerful for me is that they're not only working on sort of normative change, right? Changing behavior, changing expectations for what we expect out of our businesses. But they're also building the institutions, like laying the pipe, to make sure that those one-off innovations actually are replicable and scalable and institutionalized. And so there have been stories in Guardian and in other places for decades about doing well by doing good. Yeah. And so it wasn't like B Corp's invented that. What they did do is say, this is how you'll know whether somebody's doing good enough to be worthy of your support. And we're not just going to look at one narrow piece of your business, right? Your CEO to lowest employee ratio, pay ratio, or just whether your coffee beans are fair trade. We're going to look at the whole business, and there's going to be a third party that's going to come in and verify that. So what we found out is that 75% of consumers, or maybe it's 73% of consumers, actually give a crap about the company that stands behind the product. And so what B Corp does, it stands on the shoulders of all of those innovations over the last 20 or 30 years that gave us 400 or 500 different certifications for each little narrow industry or each little narrow thing, and they sort of pulled widened the aperture on our lens so we could look at the whole company, not just an individual practice, and we could look at every industry, not just one industry, and that gives us a tremendous amount of voice that we didn't have before. And so you've got 60, 70 different industries, 800 some odd countries, 30,000 employees, 20 million followers of this community. It's only like 5 or 6 years old. And so there's some traction in that and some collective action that they can take that they weren't able to take before because there wasn't a frame that you could use to look at them and say, these are the ones who aren't just talking a good game, but these are the ones who are actually walking the talk.
Okay, so that cynical part of me is growing exponentially. So just to stick with that for a moment, 73% say in survey they give a crap about things. 73% also say they have sex 3 or 4 times a week. So I mean, how I don't see 73% of consumers behaving like they give a crap about anything actually around this. So actually, so it's great that you're providing that framework. You're providing the certification. You're pushing out there the fact that you're more aware, and it's a third-party certification, and you're a better business. But actually, are you seeing any connection, really, really honestly, on a broader level between what you're creating and that mass of consumers who are actually just busy living their lives and not actually particularly worried about these issues?
Sure. I think it's a healthy skepticism about whether the conscious consumer, how conscious they are, and how willing they're to be conscious at any given time and every given day. And so I think that's a totally healthy skepticism. Our job is to make good easy. It's complicated to think about all these things. It's time consuming to think about all these things. And how do we make it easier for folks to make the choices that they say they'd like to make? And so any good brand is basically just a signaling device to cut through the clutter of a very confusing and often fragmented marketplace. And so at a very base level, B Corp is a brand for good business that helps people signal whether they're looking for a bottled tea or for a new furniture source for their office complex. It lets them say, oh, there's a company that I can source from that I know has an independent set of rigorous standards. And nothing's going to be perfect, and the B Corp certification, of course, isn't. The only thing you know about any set of standards is all the 100 things that are wrong with them, and so we're willing to own that. But what you have is a governance process that creates some guardrails where shareholders actually, for the first time, have a legal right to hold those organizations accountable for not just making them the most money the fastest, but also for creating a positive impact in the world. Like, that's never happened before in history. That's what the Delaware Bar called a seismic shift in corporate law, which doesn't just rely on consumers to sort of have an epiphany while they're walking down the aisles of Whole Foods or their local bodega. What it does is it bakes into the legal DNA of the company that this company is legally obligated to consider the impact of their decisions on all of us, not just on their own bottom line. And that's the combination of sort of the normative change and the institutional change that the B Corp community is working on. It's the combination of those two things that I think is important, not just sort of a blind reliance on enlightened consumers to sort of make the right decision all the time, because we know that is unlikely to happen.
Okay, and when you look at the world and you see, okay, you've got all these businesses that are small entrepreneurs, but then you've got big businesses that are sort of holding often the reins of power and often sticking with the status quo.
Yep.
Do you ever see a possibility that bigger companies will take on the principles of B Corp? I mean, I know you've got Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia, so they're obviously very well known, but they're known in this space. It's not they're doing anything differently. They're just showing that support for what you guys are doing and building on their provenance. But I mean, is it all about just the entrepreneurs, or can you ever see it morphing into something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple things. So the first is, while neither Patagonia nor Ben & Jerry's or Seventh Generation or Method or Revolution Foods or other folks like that needed us, B Lab, to sort of confer on them some holy water and say, you guys are a good company, it would be wrong to say that being a B Corp hasn't changed the way they do business.
Okay,
and
great.
so Yvonne Chouinard and Vincent Stanley from Patagonia just published a book called The Responsible Company. And the heart of that book is what they call a checklist for what they call responsible business behavior. And they derived that, one of the two sources they derived that from was from the B Impact Assessment that companies use to do their performance. So even a company like Patagonia, that's been around for 40 years, practicing this at a higher level than most, found this to be a useful process, whether they were going to get certified or not. They found this a useful process. That's been the same thing for other companies sort of at the leading edge. Ben & Jerry's is actually taking some of this stuff and actually implementing it in their supply chain. So like last week I was on a panel up in Vermont, and Jostein Solheim, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's, just talked about the fact that he made 2 supplier decisions recently where he chose 2 suppliers specifically because they were B Corps over 2 other suppliers. And the fact that people are starting to make decisions either to change their internal practices or to reward people outside of their business but in their supply chain around verified performance standards is a big deal. And so the start is I wouldn't underestimate this as just sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval for all those that are already in the choir. The second thing I'd say is, like Ben & Jerry's making these decisions in the context of a Unilever supply chain, or Plum Organics getting acquired by another B Corp, getting acquired by Campbell's Soup, but registering as a benefit corporation in Delaware on the first day. There are a bunch of things that we're starting to see happen where large multinationals are beginning to say, I can't buy my way into this marketplace. I can't buy my way into credibility to address that sort of trust gap that you were referring to in your opening statement. I can't do that on my own. What I need is I need to sometimes acquire someone who has trust with those consumers, who's attractive to the millennial workforce, who are going to choose to work for me, who are going to choose to invest in me, or going to choose to buy from me. And I can't get there on my own. I need other people to take me there who have already built up that trust. And so if I'm going to make this a part of my corporate M&A strategy to buy my way into these markets and into the trust space for those consumers or those potential workers, I need to do it through some of these companies. And then when I do that, I need to make sure that those companies, that the act of the acquisition doesn't actually destroy the same trust that they had built. And the way to do that is to say they're still meeting those same third-party verified standards of not only social and environmental performance, but the same standards of accountability and the same standards of transparency. So I think the first way this sort of reaches up into the lofty air of our multinationals is through corporate M&A strategies. I think the second way, like what we're seeing at Ben & Jerry's, is through supply chain initiatives. I think the least likely in the short term is that any folks from within the Fortune 500 themselves, of today's Fortune 500, themselves become B Corps, because I think the legal hurdle alone will be pretty prohibitive for them, given that sort of cat's out of the bag. They're already publicly traded with myriad disembodied shareholders who are pretty focused on profit maximization as why they're investing in the company.
Okay, I mean, interestingly, the CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman, which owns Ben & Jerry's, said last couple of weeks ago in New York that as a result of buying Ben & Jerry's, that actually helped them to develop their learning. So, I mean, do you genuinely think that can be a force, that groundswell upwards?
I think it can be. I don't think by definition it will be. I think the future is something that we create, not something that happens. And so Ben & Jerry's has had to fight hard in the decade and change that since they've been a part of Unilever to fight for their space within a larger structure. And they've done so pretty effectively, not insignificantly because they had built in a governance structure which gave them some real power. And so,
which is the power of that framework.
Right. I think you can think of it as an inoculation. The B Corp legal framework or that new legal entity gives entrepreneurs an inoculation against the virus of short-termism. Whether that's as yourself, as a company with outside investors, whether you're private or public, or if you're a subsidiary of a larger public company that's got to meet quarterly earnings calls and it's got the hedge fund managers beating them back, you've got to have something other than goodwill to fall back on. And in this case, what you've got is, guys, I want to make as much money as the next person, but when we became a B Corp, we were legally obligated to have this conversation about how this decision will impact not only our quarterly earnings, but our long-term earnings and the long-term health of our workers, community, and the environment. And those legal guardrails are incredibly important for those often tense moments in the boardroom when you're making big decisions around acquisition, divestiture, plant locations, new product introductions, what factories you use, what standards you use in those factories. And now all these companies have a legal obligation to consider more than short-term profit when they make those decisions. And that's a pretty fundamental shift in capitalism.
Okay. Just want to get down to the granular level.
Yep.
So I'd like, if you're putting you on the spot, just I hope something trips off the top of your head, just one really inspiring story of a B corporation that, by becoming a B corporation has really sort of either built a market or transformed its business, or just something to give us a...
Sure.
Because we need stories as well as principles.
Of course.
And the second thing is you said every certification has 100 problems. What's the biggest risk to B Corp growing? So a positive story first and then a sort of...
So we'll end on a negative note. Excellent.
God, you saw through me.
There's...
Okay, no, okay.
No,
Let's do it the other way around. Let's go with your thing. Let's have what's the biggest risk to you guys, and then let's have a good story.
Yeah. So clearly, for sure, the biggest risk to the B Corp community is a reduction in the integrity of the standards themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So the potential that B Corp gets co-opted, either as more and more people, the more valuable it gets, the more people want to use it, the more chance there are for bad actors, and so. Maintaining the integrity of the standards and the process by which the standards evolve is hugely important. So that would be number one. And I just go into slightly more detail on the evolution of the standards is, I think one of the things that's made, had enabled B Lab to have some traction over this first 5 or 6 year part of our journey is that the folks that founded B Lab are business people, not activists.
Yeah.
And we didn't come from this community of sustainable business leaders. So we didn't come with a preconceived notion about, oh, this is the answer. If you would all just do what I say, the world would be a better place. What we did most is just listen to all the diversity of opinion and recognize that perfect is the enemy of the good. What the world needs right now is a good way to differentiate between good, better, best businesses, more than it needs a perfect way to do that.
Yeah.
And that if we have set up a governance process for the evolution of the standards that makes sure that they evolve like software, and that you get 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, you're expecting these things to get better. And as we're now beta testing version 4.0, which will launch in January, it's incorporating 3,300 individual line items of feedback that have come from the community, right? The world of folks, not just B Corps. Because on every single line item of the assessment, you can leave feedback and say, I think this is a dumb question. I don't think you're asking it the right way. I think the way you're asking it can lead people to drive a truck through this hole that you've created. Or I think how many points you're awarding for each different answer, moving from left to right in the answer buckets, are inappropriately weighted. So all of that wisdom from the crowd can be sucked into the assessment tool to enable us to do what we're supposed to do, which is to create a transparent, credible governance process to evolve the standards.
Okay, and just intervene there, because I'm just trying to pick on that thing of transparency.
Yeah.
Does that transparency come because you think, oh, that's what we need to do? Or does it come from a sense of humility? I'm really interested in getting to the energy of that, because everyone talks about transparency, and a few people talk about radical transparency, but they always talk about transparency
for
of
others.
or transparency of others, or what actually the limits of their, they talk about it, but when it comes to a challenge, they say, oh, well, we can't talk about that.
Yeah.
How are you building that sense of transparency, and where does it come from?
So I think it comes from a couple places. I think the transparency comes from a fundamental belief that we don't know all the answers. And whether you want to call that humility or just honesty.
Well, normally they're the same.
Fair enough. But we don't pretend that B Lab has all the answers. There are people that have been working on this stuff for much longer, that have much more, they've forgotten more about sustainability than we will ever know. And so the question is, how do we become a platform in which they can pour that knowledge into something that isn't just for their clients or for their company, but that can become a free and open source tool that any business can use. And that becomes a learning community that helps people move down the path. So I think it starts with a recognition that we don't know all the answers and that we have no axe to grind. I think the second thing is we would view it as like a cost of entry, even if you didn't believe that, even if you thought you didn't know all the answers. I think in an age of instant gratification when it comes to data and information, people are going to press. And this is like the era of the super empowered individual who can cause create a lot of great change, but also create a lot of mischief. And so the most important way to engage folks is to say, we got nothing to hide. Like, here it all is. Please tell us all the things that are wrong so we can fix them. And so I think it's both for us an acknowledgement that we don't know everything. And then even if we thought we did, the best way to engage folks and to build that trust that we talked about before is to allow people under the hood and say, take a look at everything. And if you see something that we're not doing as well as you think we should, let us know, and we'll fix it if we can.
And before we get on to your good story, just South by Southwest Eco tends to be a more activist community.
Yeah.
So in terms of when you look at the constellation of change, because obviously there are thousands of things going on in the world to try and drive change, you're one of them. How do you think you should be so firstly, are you connecting with that sort of broader ecosphere? And if not, what more could you be doing to sort of say, actually, we're here, but actually in a constellation, if I connected with that group there or that group there, we could drive even greater change.
Right, so I think it's a great point. So the phrase we use internally and within the B Corp community is that social change is a team sport. And so we recognize that no individual company, no individual organization is going to create the change we seek on its own. And so we very actively seek out collaboration with not just individual companies to become part of the B Corp community, but with tons of other organizations who are all doing incredibly important work in sort of different parts of the ecosystem. So it's going to take everybody rowing the boat in the same direction to get where we want to go. I think that for the first 6 or 7 years, we've been primarily focused on what we viewed as like the necessary first step. which is to build a community of businesses to critical mass so that we could point to it and say, there they are. And then people can judge whether it's good or good enough on their own. But they can say, oh, that's what the BCorp community stands for, and I can judge it by who's in it. And now that we're at a point where we're going to be at 1,000 B Corps relatively soon, which is still not, I'm not trying to oversell that. It still is a very small community, but it's at least bigger than a bread box. And it's big enough that you've got companies across most every different industry. So whether you're looking to buy stuff for your home or for your office, in most cases, you should be able to find a B Corp in that industry with whom you can decide whether they've got the price, the quality, the service, and the rest of it that you need to make either to run your business or to feed your kids. But you now have that choice. But what we haven't done, and what we're in the beginnings of doing, is widening the aperture on our lens from thinking just about building a community of businesses to building a movement of people. Because at the end of the day, it's people who make change. Institutions help make that change lasting or create sort of the channels through which it makes the water more easily to flow. But it's ultimately the people that are out there digging those irrigation ditches to start. Horrible metaphor, but like you get the point. And
We'll forgive you.
Thank you. So this notion of, so in 2014, we're about to launch something called the Be the Change campaign, which is a way to celebrate and reward people that are using business as a force for good. So whether that person is acting as a conscious consumer and making a decision, that we can celebrate that decision, or whether it's a person who is in a business, helping that business take the first step by measuring what matters, right? Their impact on the world, not just on their own bottom line. Create lots of different ways to acknowledge and reward people and celebrate people who are leading that change so that folks can see each other and ultimately get rewarded for doing that. Because we ought to have, if you think about it, one of the coolest rewards programs ever, because you got 1,000 companies that are all part of one community saying, good on you, thanks for doing what you're doing, and here's a thank you for doing that.
And Jay, just by the way, you're touching your, yeah, that's probably better. Just talk about very briefly that, and then we'll get to your example at the end.
Right.
But to get to that thing about how you see change, because there's that guilt, or you're bad, big stick approach, or there's that sort of we can be innovative is a very positive change. I mean, are you absolutely clear that the way to move is to say actually it's all around positivity, it's all around innovation, it's all around what you can do? Isn't there a danger that actually most businesses are actually still running a business model that is driving us over a cliff, and actually just by being positive that actually you are not actually addressing the real problem, which is actually those who are refusing to move and won't move. I mean, isn't there a danger that you're just being too positive?
Yes, we're being too positive. So maybe, I think that's a fair criticism. I think that we just like we said before, that we believe there's an ecosystem of folks that are moving in this direction. There are a ton of really smart, very talented people that are banging the drum with large multinationals and trying to move those battleships, 2 degrees to starboard. And they're doing it either through shame and blame or through celebration and reward of little steps. And we would applaud all of those efforts. We think that all of that stuff is necessary. Where we think we can play a unique role is to shine a light on those that are creating the positive alternative that we want to be a part of. And so it's not enough to identify the problem or to theoretically talk about what solutions might look like. We think it's incredibly important to point to tangible, concrete, living, breathing businesses that are not only making money, but they're also making a difference. And not just anecdotally, but with third-party verified performance metrics that everybody can look at. And so I think where we stand on that one is that there's probably a role for fear or anger or shame and blame. It's not the role that we think we're best suited to play.
Great. Yes, I was about to ask a question. So what I'm going to do, we've got a mic. So what I'm going to, because I think this is more fun, I think the person who wants to ask a question, if you can actually just come and, if you want to ask a question, just come around, and then you're going to come and take my chair. Well, so if you can just if you just come and grab the mic. And if you come and just sit down and ask the question. That gives me a break, you see.
Yeah, perfect.
Good
luck, Jay.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. So currently I'm an MBA student and I'm writing a paper and doing a lot of research that one of the major ways to shift multinational corporations and how they're running their business is through educating the public. Because I think inherently people want to do good, and that just trying to create fear or something like that isn't really going to create that shift. Once you educate the public, then the public will demand those changes. So I think your Be the Change campaign is actually kind of doing that. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts on this matter.
Yeah, so I think that, well, thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it. I think what we struggle with as a community is whether or not the end objective is to, if we just inform consumers, we give them all the facts through transparency, they'll do the right thing. And I think there's some appropriate skepticism that will just sort of happen as a result of transparency. I think transparency is sort of necessary but insufficient. And so I think that what people, where we focus our energies more is on the business leaders themselves, because at the end of the day, a consumer can't purchase a product that doesn't exist. Or if I'm getting out of business school, I can't go to work for a company that doesn't exist. Or if as an investor, I can't invest in companies that don't yet exist. And so it's the entrepreneur who creates the marketplace in which we engage, right, as people, whether it's as consumers, workers, or investors. And so I think the Be the Change campaign is really important for being one tool in that toolbox, and that one specifically to engage consumers, and do so by mostly by expressing gratitude to start, which is thanks for doing what you're doing. And most people prefer to compete in a way that says, wow, you know, Stacy's doing some amazing things, and give way to you to be acknowledged on your Facebook page or whatever it is, to say, check out Stacy, she's doing all this awesome stuff. And most people respond to, well, shoot, if Stacy's doing that, well, I should be able to do what Stacy can do. And so I think that's the way we want to engage consumers.
Okay, I'm aware we haven't got that much time, so let's, next person, let's just get a production line going.
And I'll only do this.
Yeah, that's better. And if you can give your name and where you're from first, keep your question brief, and then Jay can power through.
Also try to do that. Hi.
Good afternoon. Oh, good morning. My name is Charmaine Sellers. I'm from Austin, Texas, and I own a construction and safety training services business. I would like to get your perspective on the buy-in from my industry, the construction industry.
Right.
Specifically, our LEAD program. We try to initiate green practices as much as possible.
Yeah.
But some of we've experienced some challenges.
Right. So thank you for that. We stand on the shoulders of a ton of the stuff that's been done by the green building industry. And so I think that sustainability movement as a whole wouldn't be where it is without the leadership of USGBC and LEAD. And not to say that they or any standards organization is perfect. There's plenty of warts everywhere. But they've done some amazing stuff. So what we did was to try to create that B impact assessment that I talked about before is customized for each different industry and for how big or small your business is. And so we worked with a group of folks in the building industry, from the design and build folks to the contractors to the real estate folks, et cetera. And so there's like 3 or 4 different tracks within that to allow the building industry to say, how do we move beyond LEED? And so it's one thing to build the building and say, check, here's where I am, but we all know that the bigger environmental footprint is how the building operates over its useful life. And also, it's pretty important how the people are being treated in the building, what's being shipped out the front or what's being dumped out the back. And so hopefully we're providing a framework that will be useful for you and for your industry, so that those that are leading the way can say, sure, I can give you points for your lead thing or help you through that process. But one of the reasons you should choose to work with us is because we've actually embedded these things into our DNA. Either because we're using the B Impact Assessment, and that's free, so have at it, or because we've decided to join this community of leaders as a B Corp.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charmaine.
And Jay, very, very briefly, next person comes up, can you just talk a little bit about the fact you don't have to do everything at once. The fact
Yeah.
you can test yourself against
That's right.
the principles.
Yeah, so the B Impact Assessment is free online resource for any business. And so you can go to bimpactassessment.net or just bcorporation.net, either way, and you'll see a little sticky note there that says measure what matters. And so you can use that. It's totally free, and it's got a bunch of tools and resources and best practices that can help you along the path. And it's totally non-prescriptive. So you figure out, just like you're looking at a map, and you can figure out lots of ways to get from Austin to Houston. But you know you want to get to Houston. This is a way to say there's lots of different ways to create a higher impact business. You choose which way makes most sense to you.
Okay. Okay. Hello, my name is Jennifer Lassiter, and I'm a consultant that works with managing and developing sustainability projects here in Austin. And my question is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I heard you and the other gentleman say something about the current Fortune 500 companies. You didn't really see them becoming a B corporation.
Right.
So what is really kind of their path for transformation? Is it their access to tools like those you provide,
Right.
perhaps? Or what's
Right.
your thought on that?
So
Their transformation to a more,
yeah.
to behave and be more like a B corp.
Right, so I think there's a way for existing multinationals to be a part of this movement. And I think that the most logical early ways are going to be to use the B Impact Assessment as a way to implement more sustainable supply chain initiatives, like what we talked about earlier with Ben & Jerry's. And there are a whole group of B Corps that are beginning to do that this year. And I think that will provide a roadmap for how sustainability professionals like yourself can use this as a tool to help larger companies implement more robust, sustainable, and high-impact supply chain initiatives. So I think that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, as I think that these companies have typically pretty large M&A practices.
That's merger and acquisition, correct?
You got it, right. So they're going to go buy a bunch of small companies for a variety of reasons, to get into new markets or to speak to consumers that they're not really doing a good job speaking with. And so whether it's Campbell's buying Plum Organics or Unilever buying Ben & Jerry's or Ecovera buying Method or Danone buying Happy Family, those are all examples of larger, interestingly, many European companies buying authentic US brands, all of whom happen to be B Corps, and making explicit decisions to keep them B Corps, rather than just sort of roll them into their large company sort of as a division or basically as a P&L spreadsheet. And they're doing that because they think that's a way for them to help sort of not destroy the very brand equity that they just purchased. And so I think those are the two primary ways that the existing multinationals will get on board. The other thing I'd say, which we didn't say before, is I think it's important to recognize that today's Fortune 500 companies are likely not going to be there in 20 years' time. And so one of the reasons why B-Lab focuses on small and mid-sized enterprises and private companies to start is we think that's where the most innovation is happening. And what we're trying to do is to build the next generation of publicly traded companies and the next generation of Fortune 500 companies and have them show up in the public marketplace with sort of that armor on to help them protect the mission as they scale. And so I think it's like 74% of the Fortune 500 company in 2005 is different than it was in 1985. And so the pace of the turnover is going incredibly rapidly. And so we're much more concerned with giving people the tools and the structure and less on sort of elephant hunting for the biggest companies on the planet and how do we help them move today.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. How are you?
Good. I'm Ian Rosenberger. I have a little company called Thread, and we take trash from the streets of the developing world. We convert it into fabric, and then we sell that fabric to companies who are looking to improve both their social and environmental footprint. And we're actually also in the process, full disclosure, of becoming a B Corp. And it's also a part of our plan for being acquired in the future. We think we're more acquirable as a B Corp than we are. But we're a supply chain company, and the process by which we convert plastic trash to fabric, it gets touched 5 or 6 different times by 5 or 6 different companies before it actually ends up in the hands of the company, our customer, who will use it. And those companies very rarely care about our social mission, our environmental mission. And I'm wondering what inroads you think because the great thing about B Corp.
Okay, question.
Sorry, what inroads? Thanks. You're making with those companies kind of in the middle of the supply chain.
Right.
that don't usually care.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can't say
And just say we've got 5 minutes, so we've got 4 questions, so 1 minute per question.
Yep. So I don't think we've done anything to date, sort of in that all the intermediary steps. But maybe afterwards I can talk to you about a company in South America called Triciclos that might be worth partnering with. And then also there are a bunch of B Corps in the apparel space, from Patagonia with their Common Threads initiative, or folks like Go Light or Attain, who might be able to be great end users of your threads. But I think it's a great question about how do you go from sort of source to end consumer product, and figure out how do you, my bet is it's like a pincer movement, right? You got to come from both sides, and all the folks in the middle are basically looking to be service organizations. And so if we let them know that this is how you can best serve, is by helping to steward this type of a company through the supply chain, I think that's probably our best bet. So thanks, Ian. I hope I talk to you afterwards.
Great. Thank you.
Joe, you'll keep us honest and keep us moving. Thank you. Hey, Tom.
Okay, I'm Tom Workman with Concurrent Design, and I'd like to say I think that your delivery and the way you delivered it was, for me, absolutely perfect this morning. Joe, you played a good foil, but my question really is for you and your 99% skepticism. You can, yeah, there you go.
It's like musical chairs, isn't it?
I
wasn't expecting to be on the receiving end.
Skeptical is somewhat irrational to me when I look around the room, and it's self-evident that there are people who are interested in this, and they came here. Jay is doing this. He's got 1,000 companies already signed up doing this. I've been doing this for years and didn't even know I was doing a B Corp thing.
And your question?
My question is, what can the press do to help support this effort, to take that 1% of positive hope for humanity and try to double that to override some of this skepticism?
Okay.
Which I understand
No. I was teasing. I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. No, but in answer to that question, I mean, the reason I set up that website was to completely transform the way that the press responds to business, because traditionally, business, anytime a business puts its head above the parapet and does something that's reasonably useful, or that is sort of courageous from their perspective, the press normally beats them over the head. And I think and the press has got completely caught up in bad news, good news. And I decided to change that to what was inspiring and what was depressing, which sounds the same, but actually is a completely different way of looking at business, which is actually that when people are genuinely being courageous, that I think it's really important for the media to respond to that, and actually to talk about that and to give a space for that, while at the same time challenging them, because actually anytime any business is doing anything is not enough. But I think that the press itself is still stuck in a very old paradigm of sort of good versus bad. It doesn't understand sustainability largely. It doesn't have an interest. Business journalism is still stuck in share price movements and all the rest of that garbage, which actually might be has its place, but actually we need to transform the whole of society. And to do that, we need to be showcasing best practice, doing all sorts of things about how we can move from A to B, because most people don't believe there's a future we can transform to. There's a huge gap between those, and actually we need to be able to populate what that future looks like, so that actually everyone can transform and actually can move towards that. And at the moment, we haven't really articulated what our future looks like that actually is different, but actually is also successful. And I think the B Corp is one example of showing we can have a better future, and we can actually move from where we are to that place.
And having some kind of framework that's being identified then makes sense to me, because I didn't have a framework, and I'm going to go look this up.
Great.
So
okay, it's all changed now.
Be courageous.
Come on, Jay, you're back. God, it's all moving around here.
Hi, I'm Saskia, and I work at Method. So we're a founding B Corp and a long-time supporter of this methodology. So my question is also about supply chain, because I think one of the key areas that we want to dive a little bit deeper within our own supply chain is to work with our chemical suppliers, our ingredient suppliers, to bring more accountability upstream. And as we become an increasingly plant-based ingredient supplier, I just wonder, have you started to work with farms and the agricultural community to try to bring more accountability, and also sort of upstream from that as well? Like, how do we build more supply chain accountability also within the agricultural sector?
Right, that's a great question. And I think that, sort of riffing off of what I said earlier, is B-Lab doesn't sit here with answers that we're waiting to pull something off a shelf and deliver. I think what we are is a platform for business leaders like you to work together with other folks that are really pushing the envelope to figure out collectively how you can go further together than you could alone. And so whether it's getting together with folks, fellow B Corps like 7th Gen or King Arthur Flour or Cabot Creamery and Ben & Jerry's, all of whom are pulling stuff from the food system, or even folks actually like Patagonia that are going into the food space through Patagonia Provisions, I think you've got a community. One of the benefits of being a B Corp is you're in a community of leaders who aren't just thinking this way, but are actually acting this way. And as part of their business model, they're trying to push further and get themselves and others out of their comfort zone. And so I think that the short answer is there's a supply chain working group that's being formed now, coming off of our Champions Retreat in Boulder last week or two, specifically to look at this issue. And it would be great if you would participate in that, because I think that's how the answer will be coming through the collective, through the collaboration, not through some lab somewhere with somebody either discovering an answer or giving you a specific program to implement. I think it's going to be something that's going to arise through active collaboration, and I think that collaboration is more likely to happen from folks within an aligned, high-performing community than a random aside at a conference.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, last question.
Coen, great to meet you.
What's up, Peter?
My name is Peter. I am the CLO for a company called Earth Benign. And this question is regarding complementary currencies. And just to give a brief snapshot, we live in a world that's kind of dominated by currencies that are kind of owned by private entities. And since they have this monopoly over them, have you, for the purpose of giving a business its power to create its own liquidity, have you or any of your partners considered looking more into the possibility of these complementary currencies, not like Bitcoin, right, but not just Bitcoin, but Bitcoin, right, and beyond?
Right. So short answer is I admit to only enough knowledge to be dangerous around sort of alternate currencies and things, about most things, but this one in particular. So whether it's Bitcoin or Berkshares or other sort of alternate currency models. And so there isn't anything specific in the B Corp assessment that says, do you, at least to my knowledge, like, does your company accept alternate forms of exchange in your relationship with customers or vendors? Interesting question. Maybe it should, you know. And so as the sharing economy and those things sort of take on more, more concrete, they manifest more concretely in the world. Maybe that's an example of one of the ways that the assessment should improve over time, is to recognize that there are alternate forms of exchange, and that those companies that are accepting of those are helping to create a society that would enjoy more of a shared and durable prosperity, and therefore we should reward those companies by having them show up as higher performing. It's a great question. My bet is it isn't in the assessment today, but maybe that's something that should be.
Yeah, I hope that conversation increases.
Cool.
Okay,
thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you for your answer.
You got it, Peter.
Right, so you're now over there. So we've got, I think, probably 1 or 2 minutes. So just final question, Jay, is where would you like to be in 3 to 5 years? So I know you're, and I like your honesty saying it might scale up, might not.
Right.
So, but in your sort of dreams, but within a realistic time frame, where would you like it to be?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So I'll answer it slightly quickly personally, and then for the B Corp movement, right? So personally, I think one of our biggest challenges, I say personally for me, and I think the whole B Lab team and the B Corp community, where the biggest gap is between what we aspire to be and where we are is in how hard we're working and at a completely unsustainable pace. And so when I think about myself or our team at B Lab or those within the B Corp community whom I meet all the time, is we constantly tell ourselves and each other that this is generational change that we're involved in, and that therefore this is a marathon and not a sprint. And yet no matter how many times we tell ourselves that, we just keep on sprinting 100-meter dashes every day. And so personally for myself, and I hope it isn't 3 years, I hope it's more like 3 weeks or months or days, that needs to change, or else this cohort of change makers will burn itself out, and then we'll have to go through a sort of a dormancy period while things regenerate, and we'll sort of not quite be starting from scratch, but we'll have to sort of reboot And so I think one of the most important things for me personally, and I think for those that I work with, is to figure out how to take advantage of all the opportunities in front of us, to have all the urgency that we bring to this work, but to be mindful of the fact that it is a long process, and if we want to be around for all of it, we need to sort of take care of ourselves along the way. So that's sort of a first.
And that's really helpful because this morning in the plenary, the speaker was saying, "I'm exhausted." I mean, there's a lot of exhaustion around.
There is, and you know, just one of the things I thought was beautiful. One of the things I'll take away from that plenary is, you know, he said, this is in response to another dynamic about like other people coming in to like give him his food, or he's like, I can grow my own damn food. And I think the energy of that is really the energy of entrepreneurship, the energy of the future is something that I can create. It isn't something that that will happen to me. And I think that is a very powerful place to come from in terms of one's agency in the world. And so right now we sort of hold up as these icons, these individual entrepreneurs or activists that sort of work these Herculean, they're like Hercules, and they're just doing so much, so they just never stop. And we put them on the covers of magazines, or we have them do TED Talks, we do the other, and it all becomes sort of the deification of an individual superhuman being. And I don't think we need to be waiting for Superman to come save us. But you know, that power is within all of us, but only if we say, yeah, I'm going to make my own damn food. I'm going to build my own damn company. I'm going to invest the money the way I want to invest. I'm going to go for that work for the company that allows me to bring my whole self to work, but I can't do it in a way that destroys the very energy that animated me to say I could do it. I could be a part of the solution. And so I think that there's that he's feeling tired. He's reflecting, I think, what a lot of the people in this community are feeling, and I think we got to take care of ourselves and take care of each other, you know, so that we're around for the long haul, because that's what this is going to be.
Great. Well, that sounds as good an inspiring end to this as we could have hoped for. So I just want everyone to say thank you to Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks a lot.